everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my ranking and reviews of my Booktube prize judging for round one. I was a judge for the nonfiction group, so there are 3 groups in the Booktube prize this year: fiction, translated fiction, and nonfiction. I am judging nonfiction for the whole year, and I was assigned Group D in the nonfiction round for the Octofinals. So I am just going to quickly go through my rankings and what I thought about each of these books, because I'm sure that your feeds are filled up with these types of review videos, ranking and review videos right now. I know mine are, and I'm loving them, but I don't need to make this a long video. So in this, I'm going to tell you my rankings and reviews from the worst to the first. So in number 6, the worst book for me by far was White Magic by Alyssa Washuda. And this just isn't my kind of book. Alyssa Washuda is an Indigenous author from the United States, and she has written what is described as a memoir in essays, and I just thought it was a hot mess. I just thought it was a hot mess. I thought it was disjointed, incoherent in places. It was too long. It was, in one section of the book, it's literally a daily blow-by-blow account of her toxic relationships. So she keeps involving herself with these men who treat her badly, who obviously don't care about her, who are abusive mentally and physically and sexually. And she just puts it out there in excruciating detail, and I just could not deal with it. It was just really, really tough. And so there's tons of content warnings for all kinds of bad stuff that happens to this person. And I felt empathy and compassion for her for what she went through. And it wasn't that part of it that made me dislike the book. It's just, first of all, it was overly detailed. And secondly, it didn't flow. There was no narrative flow to any of it. And so I just felt like it was just a mishmash of things jammed together, and it just didn't have a coherent storyline to me. So yeah, I was wanting more of her personal history as an Indigenous person and how that fits within the broader cultural context of living in the United States. And there's a little tiny bit of that, but it's not enough for me. That was the part that I wanted more of and didn't get. And the stuff that I did get a lot of, I didn't like. So this book just did not work for me in any way, shape, or form. It was the worst book that I read in this group. Then for my number 5 position, I am going to put I did put Aftershocks by Nadia Owusu. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name right, but this is another memoir. And again, while this one wasn't told in essays, I still found it fairly disjointed. There were sections of it that I thought were really well done. And she's a very cosmopolitan person. She's lived in a lot of different places in the United States because her dad worked for the UN. And so they were moved around a lot to different countries. And I appreciated that aspect of the story. I appreciated her, her telling of her life as a biracial person. I thought that was great. Her mom was from the US and her dad was from Ghana. But her mom leaves the family, leaves her and her sister with the dad at a very young age. And then her dad dies when she's a teenager. So she has abandonment issues, clearly, and obviously from, the loss of her parents at a young age. And she spends a lot of time trying to deal with those issues and her complicated relationship with her stepmother. She's, depressed a lot of the times, and it just jumped around a lot. Again, it didn't flow well for me. And I liked the parts that were sort of about what it was like to live in different places in the world. And so the parts of the book that I felt were informational about places and what it's like to live in those places, I enjoyed. But the personal stuff, I just found really, in places, tedious and just not told in a way that I could really connect with. So that one was in number 5 for me. And then in 6 for me was a book that I liked, but it just didn't like it as well as the 3 that I put through to the that I voted that I wanted to go through into the next round. And in the in the 4th position, I had Real Estate by Deborah Levy. Now I had read her previous book in this sort of loose trilogy of memoirs called The Cost of Living, which I really, really enjoyed. And I liked real estate, but not as much as The Cost of Living. So one of the reasons why I didn't want to put this book through to the next round, or I didn't vote for it to be in the top 3, was because it is the third book in this sort of nonfiction trilogy, this memoir trilogy that Deborah Levy is writing. And so I just think it's unfair to have later books in a series in a book prize, because you do sort of feel like you need to read the previous books. Although I don't think you do need to for real estate. I think it stands alone on its own pretty well. So this is Levy's memoir about basically becoming an empty nester. Her children, she's divorced, her children are leaving home. They've either left home or they're in the process of leaving home to go to school. And she has had throughout her life these sort of dreams of home ownership and what this perfect home would be for her. And so these essays that she's written are sort of her talking about what elements would exist in a perfect home for her. And some of those were very reminiscent to me of sort of like A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf, or other writings by women, creative women who, in order to be creative, sort of need a place to create. So being able to put a space like that together for yourself, and what does that look like? And how do you do that? And what are you giving up in order to do that? I enjoyed her discussion of those things. And I really enjoyed her discussion of what it's like to be a mom of grown children when those children are leaving home. Because I'm in that place in my life where my children are grown and they're leaving home or they have left home. And it does change your perspective on how you interact with those children. And it also changes your life in very specific ways on a day-to-day basis, because you're no longer responsible for feeding and clothing and keeping warm other people. You're just responsible for yourself. So I could appreciate those elements in this essay collection, but again, not all of the essays worked as well as others. As in any collection of essays, there's going to be some that really speak to you deeply and some that are less, make less of a connection with you. And I did find that for me with this collection. I did listen to it on audio, and I would recommend it on audio. I thought it was really well done, and I really enjoyed my time spent listening to that collection. And then, so these next 3 will be the 3 that I voted for that I wanted to continue on into the next round of the Booktube Prize. And so in number 3 spot, I put Chasing Me to My Grave by Winfried Rembert. It's a memoir, but it was told to another author, which I didn't write down in my notes, but I will have the picture up here so you can see that the person who wrote down Rembert's words. And so this is another memoir of this person's time. Rembrandt was born in the, time before the civil rights laws were passed in the United States in the early 1900s. I can't remember exactly, but it was the 40s or 50s in the South. He had a very tumultuous childhood. His mom left the family. He was raised by his grandmother. He was in trouble with the law a lot. He was a footloose and fancy-free kind of young man. It wasn't that he was mean or violent or anything like that. He just didn't particularly want to follow the rules, and he didn't really fit in well with sort of like structured environments. And so he sort of ran wild as a young man. And he gets almost lynched. He has an incident where he is arrested, and a group of white people try to lynch him, and that thankfully is not successful. But he does end up spending all this time in prison. While he's in prison, he's put into terrible, horrible places, and he experiences life on these penal plantations and things like that. He's just made to work as basically a slave, even though he's theoretically not a slave anymore. It's just awful. So all of the things that you would expect in this kind of a memoir are there, but he tells his story with a lot of, he's not bitter in any way, and he's not casting blame, and he's just sort of telling you this is the story of his life. Some things were really bad, but there were other things that he remembers with pleasure and joy and love, and that sort of shines through in his narrative. He meets, while he's in in prison, he happens to meet a young lady. They fall in love. As he gets out of jail, he marries her, and this lady is his wife for the rest of his life. They have 8 children together. His love for her shines through throughout the story. It was beautiful the way that their relationship was told. His love and affection and caring for this woman, just every time he speaks of her, it just shines through. And it was really heartwarming to read about their relationship. And later on in life, he discovers art, and he begins to create art in a way that's very unique. He uses leather to, he uses tools on leather to create these sort of pieces of art. And the pictures of the artwork are actually interspersed in the memoir, and that just elevated the book for me. It's very, very well done, and the pictures of the artwork are just glorious. I mean, he's an amazing talent. He has passed away since this book was published, and so that's sad, but it's wonderful that he's receiving recognition, even if it came late in life. I didn't love the writing style. It's a very because it's very conversational. It's very clearly this man telling his life story. It can be, again, sometimes doesn't flow very well, or he leaves pieces out and you don't exactly know what took place. But his positive attitude towards life, even in spite of the hardships and the violence that he faced and the racism that he had to endure, is really uplifting, and I think is a wonderful message for anyone. So I did really enjoy my time spent with this book overall, particularly the artwork that's shared within the pages of the book. It's just fantastic. So that was in my number 3 position. And then in number 2 for me was another essay collection. I have a plethora of essay collections in this book. And this essay collection was Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit. Now, I've read Rebecca Solnit in the past. She can be hit or miss for me. And I was a little trepidatious going into this one because I'm not a person who knows an awful lot about Orwell. I've read some of Orwell's stuff, but I don't know a lot about him as a person. But I think that this is just an excellent example of an essay collection that really works in terms of taking a topic like roses, because Orwell was very avid gardener, and one of the things that he grew a lot of were roses, taking that topic and then building essays around that topic. And Solnit does a wonderful job with that. And so there's a lot of cultural commentary about Orwell himself as a writer, so biographical sketches, stories about his work with gardening, and then branching off into the development and the growth of roses as a sort of like a pleasurable activity for gardening for people to do in their backyards, and all the varieties of roses that have been developed over the years. All that information sort of woven in together. Very, very well done. I really enjoyed my time spent with this essay collection, and I think it is really a prime example of how an essay collection can pull together a lot of different bits of information to sort of have a through line throughout the collection that makes sense for why those essays were included. And I think this is a good example of how to do it well. Plus, Solnit's writing is really fantastic. And Orwell was he was a piece of work. I didn't realize, I would not have wanted to be married to him, to be honest, but he was an interesting person, and I really enjoyed my time learning more about him. Yeah, I thought it was very thoughtful and interesting and informative, and it humanized Orwell, and in a way much better than other biographies that I have read. Red Comet, I'm looking at you. This is a really well done example of how to humanize a subject without including every little detail of the person's life. So well done, Rebecca Solnit. And then in my number 1 position was The Groundbreaking by Scott Ellsworth, which has the subtitle An American City and Its Search for Justice. And this is all about the history of the 1921 Tulsa race massacre, which I knew very, very little about going into this book. So I was excited to have this one in my group. And I think that this was a really well done book. The only quibble I had about it, I would rather read from the perspective of a Black author rather than a white author. Scott Ellsworth is a white author. I would like to read more about this issue from an Own Voices perspective at some point, so I do plan to do that. But I think Scott Ellsworth does a good job. He details the efforts to find out how many people were killed during the massacre and efforts to bring the story to light and to reckon with the injustices that were done during this race massacre. And what was interesting to me was this idea that we still, to this day, don't know how many people were killed during this race massacre. And the fact that that information was deliberately hidden by the white inhabitants of the city of Tulsa, and that they did such a good job of hiding it that we still today, with the forensic knowledge and techniques that we have and the archaeological techniques and knowledge that we have, we still can't determine how many people were killed. So that I thought was really interesting. Ellsworth also goes into what is owed to the Black community and to the ancestors of the people who were impacted by this race massacre, because most of the people who were alive at that time have since passed away. So it would be their relatives at this point, and what is owed to them, because so much wealth was lost. I mean, there was a very thriving Black community in Tulsa at this time. Some of the had thriving businesses and cultural centers, and people owned their own homes, and this was a thriving community that was completely wiped out. So people's wealth was just gone, and no way to rebuild, because nobody would help them rebuild. The government wouldn't help, the city of Tulsa wouldn't help, all of these things. So what is owed to these people at this point? And so I also appreciated that topic was addressed in the book. I think it was well written, it was engaging, and it made me want to read more on this topic. And honestly, that is what I'm looking for in my nonfiction. I don't think it was a perfect book, as I said, and I don't think that because Ellsworth's been researching, he wrote another book on the same topic, back in the 1982, I think, his first book, Death in a Promised Land, came out, and that was more of a specific history of the event itself, whereas this is more of a look at the impacts of the event into the present day and what has happened in terms of trying to uncover the history of this event, and what has happened in terms of trying to reckon with that, and have those efforts to reckon with the event been successful or not successful. So that is my rankings and reviews of the books for the first group for the nonfiction for Booktube Prize 2022. I am judging a group of nonfiction for this next round. Started on April 1st, and so April and May I'll be reading those books. I think I'm in Group B, and I'd already read 2 of the books, so I only have to read 4 this time, which is great. To read all 6 of these original books, so a little bit less on my plate for this next round. And I just appreciate very much the opportunity to be a part of the Booktube Prize judging. I have so much fun doing it, and I appreciate all the hard work that Robert at Barter Hordes puts into organizing and hosting the event. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that you're all finding some great books to read, and I will talk to you later.